Item number 13 is the process for the review of elected members' code of conduct. So this is the process that we're intending to follow. So if I can ask Warwick McNaughton and Marguerite Delbay to come to the table. I'll move it formally. Have I got a seconder for that? Councillor Clow. And could I just ask our two officers at the end of the table, in commenting on this, just to comment on what the pros and cons might be of allowing a public input into the process.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've been working with the present Code of Conduct for elected members for about 3 years. Since the beginning of Auckland Council, we had 2 reviews, and this would be the 3rd one. The reason why we're proposing to conduct the review is that with the test of time, we are finding that some aspects of the code are not working as well as they could be. And there are areas in particular in the area of conflict resolution that we could streamline and change. We've got in the current code a provision to get an independent panel. It was convened twice in 7 years. And it's a very expensive process. It didn't give us a particular outcome, and particularly good outcome. When, in effect, what happens is when we do receive a complaint, it's either Phil Wilson or myself or the General Manager, Local Board Services, who try to foster a solution. And so we feel that there are ways of improving the code with different resolution processes, in maybe looking at a way of measuring the gravity of the alleged breach or the seriousness of it, and also looking at the issue of sanctions, which, despite the fact we have very little recourse in the legislation to give teeth to the code, the fact that it has very little at the moment means that it can end up being as some people say, a wait ticket on the wrist. So it ends up being quite a big process where nothing comes out of it. So we've done, we had some preliminary discussions among staff with the Mayor's Office with some elected members, and we have identified some areas where we could improve the code. So the reason why this paper is in front of you today is because we wanted to make sure that you were happy with the proposed process. In talking to the Mayor earlier this week, he asked me to change the process that is currently in your papers, in that he wanted involvement from the governing body at an earlier stage than was proposed in the paper. So I have changed the recommendations, and you can see them on the screen, to propose that this initial consultation and initial workshops with both the governing body and the local boards, and then we would use the joint governance working party to develop the proposals that would then go to the 21 local boards and come back to the governing body for comments and then approval. So basically trying to make sure that you've got ample opportunities to workshop, debate, and play with the different ideas. We haven't, as you will have read, built a process for public consultation in the process that is described in the paper, because essentially, well, it is your code. But if you wanted to do this, we could open through our channels and let the public know that the review is taking place, and invite them to send us their comments if they had any, and we could incorporate it.
Thank you very much. I would like, if councillors would like to comment on that aspect of public input, to just get a sense of how you feel about that. So, first of all, I've got Councillor Simpson, Councillor Cooper.
That was a question on another subject. So
no, that's okay.
On
anything to do with the paper. Councillor Newman.
question.
So Councillor Simpson, starting with you.
Sorry, so it's not on the public, it's something else. So thank you, because my question was why isn't the governing body part of the same process like the local boards? And my second question is, do you not think that potentially what you've got here is you've started off by going to both groups and seeking their initial thoughts, goes right through till the governing body adopts. The last step is, of course, to advise the local boards. You haven't gone back. I'm just looking at your process, because the last thing that they know is that the working party is final proposal with the local board comments, right? So everyone's finally fed in, you pass the thing, it needs to go out to every elected member, and it's to say this is what it is.
Yes.
Surely, question, why can't I do that? So do you need to add a 6, or do you just do it anyway?
I mean, for us it was obvious, but if we can add a 6 if you feel that it would be necessary.
So do you want to think of
Well,
what?
it's you're the mover, Your Worship. But I would just say that the elected members' code of conduct is sent to all elected members.
Yeah.
To finalise, because it's no good of moving something if no one knows what it is.
Yeah, I'm happy to do this. This is binding to the extent that we can make it binding on all elected members. So I wanted to make sure that neither the governing body nor the local boards were presented with something that was a fait accompli that they hadn't had input into. This is about us, about our behaviour. So we
joint in.
If we don't have big sanctions, then we have to have a situation where each and every one of us accept this is appropriate and we will behave according to this code. Somebody's doing some wordsmithing on that now. I think we'll cover it. Councillor Casey.
Margaret, you mentioned there were a couple of parts, several aspects of the current policy that weren't working. You mentioned the expensive independent review panel being convened 2 times in 7 years. What else, in your opinion, has been found to not work properly?
So the process of mediation is not explicit in the code, and my view is that we could explore whether we could build a less onerous mediation process in the code, whether it would be, and we would discuss who would conduct it, whether it would be an independent person or it could be a staff member. Looking at, personally, I actually think that the code should be more explicit about the onus being on elected members to try and resolve the issues by talking to each other first. That's something I would put on the table. That would obviously be up to elected members to decide whether they want to do that. But the reality is, as staff, we find ourselves trying to mediate between elected members on different issues, and sometimes it can be quite uncomfortable and quite difficult in terms of relationships. So there was a mention of maybe an independent ombudsman. We could have a look at that as well and see how it would work in practice.
My next question is just about the stats. How many breaches of the Code of Conduct have you dealt with in the last year, say? And what kind of breaches? And is it elected members that make the complaints, or is it members of the public? So just give us a general kind of feel for what's been going on.
So one of the things we don't do as well as we could is actually keep good records of what we do and how. So I've got a list. I can't swear that it's as exhaustive. I've lost my
Code of conduct, vandalising council.
It's a staff code of conduct. There's a different one.
But we've heard about. So one of the issues that happens is that we get contacted and said, I've got a complaint. It's not a complaint against the Code of Conduct because I don't want to make it formal, but I'd like you to resolve it. So I'd say we had between 6 and 10 of those, which are not formal complaints. So then in terms of more formal complaints, I've got 7 on record here. And one was councillor versus local board member. Two were actually councillors versus local board member. One was councillors versus councillor. One was member of the public versus councillor. One was employee versus councillor. Another councillor versus councillor, and a member of the public against a local board member. So there's different scenarios.
And can you tell us how the resolution of those, what was the ultimate kind of outcome?
So I certainly can give you the list, and we did a SPATA review.
What happens in the end? They're resolved satisfactorily, they're not resolved, somebody's reprimanded?
So in one case, so I'll give you just the member of the public versus the councillor. Democracy Services and the governance director investigated it. We wrote...
Point of order.
Yeah,
The point of order, Councillor Hills.
I don't actually know if it's a point of order, but are we jumping into... But there's only 7, and I'm worried that is this public knowledge? Or like, what if it's about someone around this table, or what if it breaches the mediation? I just worried how deeply we're going to go into maybe what are personal issues between... I mean, I have no idea about any of them, but I just wonder if it's... is this public information already, or is this...
About the process.
I think it's appropriate as long as we're not mentioning names, but what occurs to me from listening to Marguerite is that a formal process to sort something out that could be done better informally and solve it before the problem really got bad is much better than a formal process where you entrench positions and you don't solve the solution, that you don't find solutions to it. But I think the question is a valid question, and it may not reflect well on us that there are councillor-to-councillor disputes, but none of us will be absolutely surprised that sometimes happens, as it does at other levels of government. So I don't think we should rule out discussion of that, because that might be seen as just not fronting up to the real problems that we have. I understand your concern about the speculation that it might create, but I think the way in which Marguerite is handling it is appropriate in the circumstances.
So that's fine. I have no idea who they are. If it's been
and we don't necessarily want to know.
Then maybe we don't need to.
Thank you, Councillor.
I may try and answer Councillor Casey's questions in more general terms. So in some cases, it was investigated and resolved internally, either by myself or by Phil. In one case, it was mediated by the Deputy Mayor. In one case, it's still unresolved. In one case, we involved internal audit. So there's been a variety of responses depending on the nature of the complaints.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. My question's probably more of an open question directed to you as the mover, Your Worship, and to Councillor Clow. Just having listened to the comments about the possibility of having that public input, Your Worship, if you wanted to, if you felt encouraged to add that into the process, I had the feeling that you were open to that by leading that question. So, if that wanted to be added, rather than perhaps putting up an amendment or something.
I am open to it. I know it can be a can of worms, and it might not be the most popular thing with our officers, but our code of conduct is first and foremost how we react and respond to each other and behave towards each other and staff. But I don't want this to be seen as a secretive process. We are publicly elected people, and therefore if the public has some concern about what they perceive as inappropriate behaviour, I'd like to have an avenue to hear that. But that's my personal view. I'm not imposing that on other councillors, but I'm wanting to hear feedback on that position. So maybe we'll just have a bit of a discussion around the table and come back to that question at the end, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, Your Worship, just following up on the point, because listening to Penny Bright before, I actually wondered if there was a need to look at, in a way, a format for the for the public to provide its reflection, given that there are obviously some complaints from the public that have been received previously and I assume been resolved. Although Marguerite has indicated how that might be able to be resolved, I'm just wondering if there was to be a process for some public input, however that may be. I mean, I'm on the Joint Governance Working Party. I'm not quite sure if that's the group that should be hearing or considering any submissions or feedback from the public in the first instance, but if that were to be the case, or if there were to be something supplementary to what is proposed, well, that's the code of conduct there and then.
That's a good example.
Right. Put a fine in the code of conduct.
Good breach of code
It's
of
one of the
conduct.
7 people listening is quickly.
John, hang on, mate. I'm just going to write this.
Yeah.
If that does need to be, if a process needs to be amended, whether the time frame needs to be amended to maybe give it an extra month to be able to incorporate that and to report the matter back for adoption. So I'm actually quite open if there is to be an amendment for some public input, Your Worship, but my view would be that that would probably require an adjustment to the process and timeframes which are set out in paragraph 14 in the report.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Nothing.
Oh, you're right. Okay. That was quick. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I mean, although it's probably the popular thing to do to want public input into this, and we've just been talking about public input, but I think we're in an interesting position where we are considered self-employed. We don't have employers as such, except indirectly by the people that vote for us. We don't often have any recourse to many issues about working conditions, like, you know, breaking for lunch at 3 o'clock or any of those sorts of things, or just issues or someone we can often go to. And I think we've had a few complaints, either inter-departmental, I'd say, complaints, and some from the public. But I guess for me, if that system, if it's working in some way, you know, that we do get these resolved, well, that'll be working. But there's some things that we can't code of conduct our way out. If people choose to behave badly, they will, and that's just politics. I did have a question though. Do members of Parliament have a code of conduct that has public input into the development of it?
They have a code of conduct.
Yes, I imagine they do.
In the sense of it's what's in the standing orders and how they behave.
Yes, but is there public input into that, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, it's called a constant stream of letters to the Speaker saying the behaviour of members is outrageous.
Exactly.
Why can't they stop behaving like they're in a kindergarten? And that literally occurs.
Yeah.
Now, we don't get that here, maybe because we're more mature, but equally probably because we're not televised to a wider audience, and we're not adversarial here. Yeah. So I'm not sure that there is an enormous head of public steam out there that think that we behave appallingly. I've had no feedback to that effect, but I do want us to be seen. If this is code of conduct, I think it would be a positive thing to allow the public to say, this is what we expect of our elected members. I'm not talking about a massive advertising campaign, but just putting it out there, maybe doing it on online submissions, and just getting some feedback, because, you know, if I use a former example of parliamentarians, you're in that chamber and you're absorbed with what's happening in there, and you're not seeing it as the outside world sees it. On an odd occasion, when you watch something on television and you're looking back at the behaviour in Parliament, you think, gee, that's pretty crap. But when you're there, you're not seeing it. And I'm just wondering, is there anything about our behaviour in the conduct of these sort of meetings or our committees as a whole that would lead the public to have concern? I have no indication that there is, but asking that question is an indication that we are open to hearing public opinion about what they expect of us and how we behave.
Yeah.
But I I'm not imposing that as a view on council. I'm asking you to feed back to me whether you think that might be useful.
So, going on to that, there's 170 of us, and for me, and the local boards are tasked with giving their community views, so they're pretty plugged into their communities. And for me, I just feel that between 170 of us, we've got a pretty good handle into our communities and voters. There's a lot of Facebook, there's a lot of social media. I'm not anti-putting it out there, I just don't want it to be a big, long, expensive process that has a few extreme people just throwing another opportunity to throw mud, rather than looking at what we do have a process, we do have a code of conduct, but it's making sure we adhere to that and making sure that when people do want to make a complaint or have it resolved at whatever level, and I think what Marguerite's saying, that maybe there's a better level to do it at, like almost a starting point, a graduated way of dealing with it, just as we do in all our regulatory, not all guns blazing, which puts people off sometimes, but the ability to go, okay, here's the steps, staff help us through. Hey, it's a bit like, have you spoken to your neighbour yet?
Yeah.
Before you take it to court. And so I'm really happy with if we change it to something like that, that actually helps steer us through it, and actually a process that gets two people and go, come on now, settle down, right, now what are the issues, and supports us through that process, because I think that would be really helpful. I don't know if there's much more the public can add other than, they're all idiots and don't let them go on a plane anywhere or have anything for free. But I do think that a process that, would help us through this, because things get heated. We're human, things get heated, we have our views and we can get a bit wedded to them. So I just think a more supportive process for the 170 elected members who govern the region would be really helpful, because we don't have any other professional body or support system that helps us.
I think that's a fair point.
If you want to put it out to public, fine. But yeah.
I think it's a fair point, and what I took from what Marguerite was saying before, if there is a problem between members, either members in this body or members in local board members, always best to try to tackle that problem before it escalates and not allow it to escalate or formalise it and entrench it. So I don't know whether that's part of what your feeling was on it, Councillor, but I think you'd captured that in your comments too, Marguerite, I hope.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I appreciate that addition there, because I think the statistics brought out there, it's actually the members of the governing body who are more vulnerable in the code of conduct process. There might be 170 members, but some of those members are far more targets than others, both for abuse of the process and for legitimate complaints. So I definitely agree with Marguerite's view that there's got to be a better way of perhaps dealing with this as a first cut, and I think probably in most instances that would work. But before that even first cut, I would like to see elected members, particularly local board members, actually read the code of conduct and some of the particular parts that go to relationship, because I genuinely believe there's a total unawareness of what the expectations are when you're talking about people and conducting yourself with a very small minority. But it's like everything, the words are actually there. The behaviours that are required are there. People can be critical, they can do any number of things quite legitimately, no one's saying that, but there are people who cross the line, and that is very damaging for the Auckland Council and for relationships. And the current code of conduct process doesn't resolve that, despite the really good efforts of our staff. It's certainly nothing to do with them, it's just the nature of it. And I think if there is some forcing together of people, and I don't think that's going to happen spontaneously, unfortunately, Mr Mayor, I think it's going to need a bit of leadership in that. I think that will be for the good of the organisation. So I certainly support the governing body, us having a distinct input here, and a more conciliatory approach early on the piece that might draw people out into the open, so everyone knows what they're dealing with, because that's not the case at the moment.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hills.
Just quickly, I do understand the point of going out to public, but I do worry how much we are throwing out to the public and expecting them to comment on. There's a lot of stuff this year that, even in the 10-year budget and the Auckland Plan refresh, is just overwhelming for the public, and this is another thing we're putting out there, so there's that to think about. The other thing, my comments before, I think there is some need for some privacy around this, especially if things are resolved, because I know if I thought a complaint would be, mediated and resolved, and then potential for it to be kind of put out there, I probably wouldn't make a complaint about another elected member. I haven't had experience of needing to, but just well, writing one up about Desley. No, and I have actually seen some pretty appalling behaviour when I was a local board member of members against members, and really upsetting things which I don't think were followed up because of the public nature of our roles, and it's difficult to, he said, whatever, that type of behaviour. So I think there does need to be some stronger protections in there for people to be able to confidentially make, because as an elected member it can be a bit of a lonely place at times, and a pretty intensely public place at times. So there's that to think about. But also, we do need to strengthen up the process for elected members against staff, especially publicly naming staff and things like that, which I have seen on social media a bit recently, and I think that is an issue that we all need to, right across 170 of us, to address, protecting the public servants who do not choose to be public people, and that behaviour has increased lately, and I think that needs to be strengthened in this. But yeah, I think it's important to review it, but I just want to make sure the level is right, that you're actually leaving feeling confident that they can go through a process without it becoming more political than it needs to be.
Thank you. I think they're all good points. Probably what I need to bring councillors back to is, we're talking about a process now, and inevitably we're going on to the substance of what we'll be looking at, which is really important because that's what counts. But we'll look at the substance of it in our workshop. This is, if I pull it back a little bit to the process that's been advocated here, although the comments that councillors have made I think are probably very helpful to Marguerite and Warwick at the end of the table. Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I was just going to say this is about the process, not necessarily about the content. But so my question and a comment. My question is, could you please tell me if any other council in New Zealand, for their code of conduct, involves the public?
Your Worship, we have looked into what other councils adopt to a certain extent. Not able to give a specific answer to which councils, but I can say that the template that Local Government New Zealand have circulated to all councils does not make provision for public complaints. It's to do with, really it's to do with what members expect of each other.
Sorry. Just to clarify it, I'm not proposing that it's a process for handling public complaints. It's whether the public, this is all, what this document here is out in the public now, and nobody much ever talks about it. It's a question of whether you want to say to the public, this is our code of conduct, are there amendments that you think might be necessary to it? I think you'd have to keep it pretty narrow, or it might simply become a complaint shop about this, I don't like this about rates, or you're not cutting my grass. This is about this document, and I'm presuming that neither Parliament nor the other councils allow for that, but I don't know.
Yes, thank
Warwick,
you for...
Warwick is saying that he's not certain either.
No, we're not certain. Ours does allow for complaints from the public, and so they are stakeholders in this.
Yep.
But perhaps just a little bit more context around how it arises. So it's a requirement that occurs through Schedule 7 of the Local Government Act, which is to do with our governance arrangements, and that schedule requires two documents for us to adopt. One is our standing orders, where we decide how we're going to run our meetings, and the other is the code of conduct, where we decide what behaviour we expect of each other. But it's the code of conduct that does have that element of some public as participation.
So I will rephrase my question, because it was, do other councils, when drafting up their code of conduct, involve the public
And
Don't know.
not to my knowledge, but I can't, I would have to check.
So I think that's an important point, Your Honour. Your Honour, sorry.
Oh, shall I put my wig on?
Mr Mayor, because, you know, we should potentially band together with the other councils and have a code of conduct that process that potentially, I think it's important to see what others do.
Okay.
That's my first point after that answer. And my second is, if we were to do it, I think we could potentially, if we felt the need, potentially under Roman numeral 3, you could say the local boards, we've asked in Roman numeral 3, first of all, both bodies, the councillors, the mayor and the local boards are asked for initial comments, right? Then it comes to the working party. Then it's proposed those amendments go back to the local boards for their comment. Maybe at that time, you know, or at the beginning, you could use that process of local boards. Are you asking, my question therefore is the involvement of the local boards as members for code of conduct, member to member, or are we going to take that wider to the community? So that's the difference. At the moment, I think it reads that basically you're asking every elected member for input into the current code of conduct, what it says, right?
I think the answer is it's primarily about members that are bound by the code, because if they don't have a chance to participate and shape it, then we can't expect them to accept the results that come out the other end. The separate question is there anywhere in this process that it is desirable to give the public the opportunity to reflect on what is in this document and how it might be amended?
I'm very relaxed about that, but I do note that no other council appears to do it.
No, so we'd be blazing the trail. That's with all the risks involved in that, but with all the praise that you might get for it too. Councillor Holtz.
Thank you. It's moved on a little bit, Mr Mayor, and most of the issues have been picked up. I just want to reiterate the point that this is a relationship document for elected member to elected member, and although I'm always a staunch advocate for going out to the community, in this case I think the key thing is we need to buy into it. I am a little bit nonplussed by the idea of sending this out yet again for another round of, or a round of community consultation, where, to be absolutely blunt, I'm not too sure what we would do with the consultation that we heard. Within the document is contained the ability for the community to feed back to us when they think that we're being inappropriate or if they've got concerns about us. And I think that's the bit of work that needs to be continued to be enshrined within this document. Their ability to feed their concerns to us, important. I'm a little bit ambivalent. I'm not going to die in a ditch over it not going out. I just don't like sending stuff out unless we're actually going to act on it. And I think the vast percentage of information we'll get back may well be cut the grass more, please don't fly first class, and don't be an idiot.
I think those risks are real, and you're wise to draw attention to them. Drawing attention to the fact that the public can make complaints about behaviour is probably the essential point. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to speak in favour of adding in the ability for it to go out, for the public to have some input at some time. Your Worship, I realise that they would be blazing the trail, to use your words, or taking on a leadership position there compared to other councils. It's about the public having a say if we've got the right content in there, if we missed anything, not about councillors feeling comfortable about if it covers their expectations. So I don't think there's any harm in going out to the public. It could, as Councillor Hills correctly pointed out, only those that will be interested will probably participate, and furthermore, they could pick up things that we might not necessarily pick up because we've gone to a wider field of opinions, such as the example that the councillor used around social media. So, so if it's just a signal to you, Mr Mayor, that I would encourage that to go out there. Just as long as it goes out for feedback from the public is what I'm saying. And this isn't about there's a little bit of confusion, I think, in the debate about involving the public in the process of the code of conduct investigations compared to them having some input. No, which it's not.
Confused.
Which it's not. Some people could be, and compared to actually having input into the design and picking up all the points that need to be picked up in this opportunity to refresh the document, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just wanted to make one point, which is, as a former employment advocate, I feel for the staff, because it must be a tricky situation for them sometimes, when they say, Councillor Hills and I have an issue that needs to be worked through, and if it goes to them. So I like the idea of the independence, but I just wanted to note that it could be awkward for staff. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
I'm going to agree with the Mayor for the second time today and take a glass half full approach to this. The last presentation about trust and confidence in elected members I heard was that we were just above the used car salesperson at 17%. Has that changed?
No, it has changed. In the last 5 surveys, there has been a consistent but slow lift in the level.
So where are we at now, Mr Mayor?
So I think about 22%.
Right, so it doesn't matter whether it's 17
So we're above the
or
used car
22.
salesman, but we probably still haven't reached the level of the insurance.
So what you've done is just reinforce my argument that this could be an opportunity to let people know that we do take our behaviour seriously.
Yep.
We have a code of conduct which should be able to regulate it and use it as a communications exercise as well. And even if it's only Penny Bright that responds to it, at least we're letting them know we're trying to be better than we are. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Happy with this process. Agree with the comments of Councillor Hulse that really this is about us and much less about the public. The other issue generally is not so much around code of conduct, but more around protocols. A councillor can go to various local board meetings and be treated quite differently from one local board to another. Members of local boards are treated quite differently amongst local boards across the region. And often it's not a good look, Mr Mayor, to see how people are treated. It's fortunate sometimes that members of the public aren't present at many meetings, because I'm sure if they were there, they would not be at all happy with how they see people treated. I'm certainly not happy with how I see people treated sometimes, and I'm thinking more in terms of local board meetings than these meetings, which I think are generally pretty well run. There's a lesser number of us. I think Councillor Watson's quite right when he points out that many local board members probably aren't familiar with code of conducts and so on. So, as much and all as I support this process, I think that there is the need for some protocols around our interaction, and I don't think that we've matured especially well around that. That's my observation, and I could give any number of examples around that, some of which I think have been very hurtful to people that I've seen at meetings.
Thank you very much, councillors. Actually, just reflecting on the conversations we've had today, I think the council has demonstrated a huge degree of maturity on a range of different issues, and the debates have been good. If I, as the perspective of a relatively new member to the council, were to try to categorise it, I'd say that 98% of the time the behaviour's pretty damn good, but we notice when some of us let ourselves down, and we do need protocols to deal with that. I want to come back to the key point, which is this is about process, and within this process we'll address that point about protocols and how well they work and how we can make sure they work better and how best to deal with a situation where the conduct is not acceptable of a member to others around the room, either here or at a local board level. I'm still reflecting on the public input. I take Councillor Hulse's point that the danger is that it becomes suddenly an exercise in we'll write to you about everything we don't like about council, and it won't have anything to do with the conduct at all. I'm thinking more in terms, and I'm happy for the Joint Governance Working Party to consider it further, more a permissive thing that would only be focused on the requirements of this document, not a wider opportunity to have a go at anything and everything. Do you want to comment on that,
Thank
Councillor?
you, because I'm sort of sitting here reflecting as one does, thinking, oh dear, in the media it'll be Councillor Hulse doesn't wish to ever hear from any member of the public ever again. And as we have our 500 Cats Lives Matter emails on here, that will never happen. But I think you're right. If we can restrict it to a rational discussion about, what do the community expect from the behaviour of elected members in the elected member fora? I think that is that's probably a reasonable discussion.
Yeah, I think that sums it up very well. And if we can, and I'm certainly not suggesting that we're going out and we're consulting frantically all next month, and there is a point at which the public says, please, no more consultation. But what I don't want this to look like is a closed shop, and if there are concerns that this document is not adequate or our behaviour towards each other is not adequate, I don't want to close my ears to what the public might want to say. So I'm going to throw it very unhelpfully back to officers to say, if you can come up with a way in which we can invite people in a focused way to look at this, and where I don't expect council officers to deal with something which is, hey, this is open slather, we can have a go at any aspect of council we don't like, then I think it's better to be seen to be listening than not to, but it needs to be within the constraints. So I wasn't criticising Councillor Hulse, I was actually agreeing with her. If that's helpful to put that on the record, then I think we can leave it open for people to talk in a focused way about that. But the Joint Governance Working Party may well be a body that can consider that further. Marguerite, would you like to make any comment in response?
Yes, sure, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I'm thinking I will have to work with our communications team, but we do have a website where we do ask people for their views on specific things, and we could look at the option of using this, or we could put an article in our Auckland saying that we are undertaking this review and inviting people to send us their comments if they'd like to.
The website with the link to what the document actually says might be a very good way of meeting the two sides of the argument. Yes, we'd like to hear what the public think about our conduct, but we don't want it to be so wide that we'd be swamped with things that aren't relevant to that. Councillor Newman, you've got a question?
Yeah, Your Worship, I don't have a problem with that. My issue, though, is whether if in the process of considering some sort of hybrid of, how we're going to go about this, we do have a resolution that requires, an adoption by the 31st of July, and I'm just wondering, and the officers haven't yet sort of settled as to how they might sort of resolve the suggestion that you've put, if the time frame works, because we're resolving a time frame here, or whether that needs to be adjusted. I just don't know. I don't know if there is to be an addition to this, whether that has an impact on the time frame for this to be reported back, given that has been proposed at para 14 in the report.
Yeah. No, I took on board the point that you made, Councillor, when you first spoke. I think with Marguerite's suggestion about using the website, linking to this document, might allow us to do that without having to change your time frame. But I seek your advice on that, Marguerite or Warwick.
Well, if we're inundated with requests for input, we might have to ask for more time if we've got a reasonable amount of public submissions that we can take into account and include in our first proposal. I think we should be fine.
I think that's a common sense answer, Councillor. Okay, I'll put the...
Yeah, I just want to comment.
Sorry, Councillor Clough.
I don't want to say much, other than that, obviously it's us to lead by example, but if you turn the telescope around, it's unfortunate to see some of the public behaviour towards us at times. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, it's a two-way thing. But many years ago, I gave up expecting, as a public representative, that people might behave towards us the way that they expected us to behave towards them. So that's just part and parcel of being an elected representative. You put up with that, or sometimes you don't. I'll tell you a little story about that, but I won't do it while it's live streamed. Okay, councillors, I'm going to take A as a whole. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. We come now to item number 14, the Mutu Karoa Trust, known to some of us as Hamlin's Hill, and we have a vacancy on that left by the resignation of Councillor Denise Lee. This is within the area of Mangakiakia Tamaki, so I'd like to move and maybe ask Councillor Filipina to second, subject to her agreement, that Councillor Bartley be appointed to that vacancy. Is there any discussion around that?
Supported.
Okay, so I'll put that resolution. Everybody clear on it? Yep. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. Carried. Unanimous applause at the beginning on your maiden speech, and now unanimous support, Councillor. Well done. There is no extraordinary business that I've been informed of, so I thank councillors for their participation and declare the meeting closed, and lunch is available presumably downstairs.